Picture a quiet suburban neighborhood in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. This is where our story starts. Nestled among the picket fences and trimmed lawns, a child named Jeffrey Dahmer grew under the watchful eyes of his parents. A seemingly typical upbringing, with school, friends, and family outings. Yet beneath the surface, a darkness was brewing. From an early age, Dahmer exhibited an eerie fascination with the macabre. He was often found collecting bones and dead animals, his innocent eyes gleaming with a morbid curiosity. His parents dismissed it as a peculiar interest, maybe a phase, or perhaps an indication of a future career in science or medicine. But these were not the innocent curiosities of a young mind. They were the early signs of a deep-seated morbidity that would later manifest in unthinkable ways. Little did anyone know these peculiar interests were just the tip of the iceberg. As Dahmer grew older, his dark interests evolved into something far more sinister. During his teenage years, a cloud of isolation began to envelop him. His parents were embroiled in their own battles, their impending divorce, and Dahmer was left to his own devices. He found solace, not in the company of friends or family, but in his eerie fascination with the macabre. His interests, once harmless curiosities, began to morph into something much more alarming. The veneer of an average teenager was simply that, a veneer. Beneath it, Dahmer was nurturing a growing darkness. It was a darkness that would soon consume him, and tragically, others as well. In the summer of his 18th year, this darkness erupted in a shocking act of violence. Dahmer committed his first murder. His victim, a hitchhiker named Stephen Hicks, was lured to Dahmer's home under the pretense of companionship. Instead, he was met with a fate that no one could have anticipated. The details of what transpired in that house are chilling to recount. Dahmer not only took Stephen's life, but he also dismembered his body in an attempt to erase any trace of his gruesome crime. His actions following the murder were meticulously calculated, a stark contrast to the violent chaos that had just unfolded. He scattered Stephen's remains in a woodland area near his home, hoping they would be consumed by the elements and wildlife. With each passing day, he worked tirelessly to cover his tracks, to maintain his facade of normality. But this was not a one-time act of violence. It was an alarming harbinger of the horrors that were yet to come. Dahmer had crossed a line from which there was no return. His actions had set him on a path that led only to darkness. This gruesome act marked the beginning of Dahmer's descent into darkness. The years that followed saw Dahmer spiraling deeper into his own world of horror. As Dahmer ventured further into this abyss of malevolence, the frequency and brutality of his killings escalated. His perverse fascination with death and dismemberment was clear in his modus operandi. Dahmer would lure young men, often from marginalized communities, into his home with promises of money or companionship. Once there, he would drug them, strangle them, and then engage in acts too gruesome to detail. This wasn't mere killing for Dahmer. He had a twisted vision that drove him, the creation of zombies. Dahmer was obsessed with the idea of having complete control over his victims, even in death. He attempted through horrifying means to turn his victims into submissive, compliant beings. His methods, involving drilling into his victims' skulls while they were still alive, were the stuff of the most chilling nightmares. The sheer brutality of Dahmer's crimes sent shockwaves through the nation. Fear gripped the city of Milwaukee as the body count continued to rise and young men continued to vanish. The community lived in the shadow of an unseen monster, their lives tainted by the palpable dread that perhaps they might be next. The city was in the grips of a reign of terror, the likes of which it had never seen before. Dahmer was not just a killer, he was a symbol of pure evil. His actions were born out of a disturbing desire for control, a need to dominate that turned deadly. He was a predator in the truest sense, stalking his victims and striking when they least expected it. His horrific crimes were a perversion of the natural order, a flagrant disregard for the sanctity of life. Yet, despite the monstrous nature of his actions, Dahmer was a master of deception. He maintained an appearance of normalcy that allowed him to evade suspicion. to blend into society as just another face in the crowd. This was perhaps the most terrifying aspect of Dahmer's reign of terror, the realization that such a monster could exist unnoticed within our midst. The horror of Dahmer's actions, the fear he instilled, the lives he took, it all culminated in a reign of terror that spanned over 13 years. From his first murder in 1978 to his arrest in 1991, Dahmer left a trail of destruction in his wake. His name became synonymous with evil, and his crimes left a scar on the nation that will never fully heal. During his reign of terror, Dahmer had become one of the most feared men in America. In 1991, the nightmare came to an end. The chilling saga of Jeffrey Dahmer, also known as the Milwaukee Cannibal, reached its conclusion. Dahmer, a man whose name would become synonymous with the most despicable acts of humanity, was finally apprehended. The capture of Dahmer was as gruesome as the crimes he committed. Law enforcement found his apartment brimming with evidence of his horrific crimes. Photographs, tools, and even human remains painted a gory picture of the atrocities he had committed. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community, leaving them grappling with the reality of the monster that had lived among them. As the news spread, the public's reaction was a mix of relief and disgust. Relief that the reign of terror was over, and repulsion at the depth of Dahmer's depravity. The media frenzy swirled around Dahmer, his victims, and the horrific details of his crimes, making it one of the most talked about cases of the year. The trial that followed was a spectacle that held the nation captive. Dahmer, showing no remorse, confessed to his crimes in chilling detail. He admitted to the murders, the mutilations, and the unthinkable acts of cannibalism. His confession painted a gruesome picture, one that would haunt the memories of all who heard it. The jury was left with no doubt about Dahmer's guilt, and he was swiftly convicted. During the trial, Dahmer's lawyers attempted to plead insanity, but the jury rejected it. Instead, they saw a man who was fully aware of his actions, a man who took pleasure in the pain he inflicted on others. Dahmer was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms, a testament to the gravity of his crimes. Dahmer's capture marked the end of a chapter filled with fear and uncertainty. The people of Milwaukee, and indeed the world, could finally breathe a sigh of relief. The nightmare was over. The monster was behind bars. With his capture, the reign of the Milwaukee Cannibal had finally come to an end. Dahmer's story did not end with his capture. In fact, his narrative extended beyond the confines of the courtroom, trailing him into the gloom of his prison cell. Once inside, Dahmer, the man who had once inspired terror, found himself on the receiving end of it. In prison, Dahmer found religion, or perhaps it found him. He was baptized by a minister in the prison whirlpool, the water serving as a stark contrast to the blood that had once been his signature. But the specter of his past could not be washed away so easily. He spent his days largely in isolation, a necessary precaution given the nature of his crimes and the notoriety they brought him. But even in death, Dahmer could not escape his past. In November of 1994, he was killed by a fellow inmate, his life ending as brutally as those he had taken. His death, like his life, was a source of media fascination, the final act of a macabre play that had held the world captive. Yet the legacy of Jeffrey Dahmer extends beyond his life and death. His name continues to echo in the annals of true crime, a chilling reminder of the depths of human depravity. His crimes have been dissected in countless documentaries, books, and films, each seeking to understand the man behind the monster. His image, once the face of fear, has been transformed into a symbol of our collective fascination with the darkest corners of the human psyche. The media's portrayal of Dahmer has been as multifaceted as the man himself. Some paint him as a monster, others as a man tormented by his own demons. But regardless of the lens through which we view him, the reality remains. Jeffrey Dahmer's reign of terror has left an indelible mark on our collective consciousness. Even after his death, the legacy of Jeffrey Dahmer, the Milwaukee Cannibal, continues to haunt us. His story serves as a chilling testament to the monsters that walk among us, hidden behind the mask of normality.